people need the confidence to take a risk. People need the confidence to declare an interest. And school isn't very good at supporting people to take risks or declare interest. And so what we're about is helping kids enjoy their lives to the point where they know what they like to do, know what they want to be good at, and they know that there's certain things they want to get better at. Just helping kids be engaged with their lives is the key.
Hello and welcome back to the Hannah Frankman podcast. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Ken Danford. Ken is a former public school teacher who quit his teaching job in 1995 to start a teen learning center called North Star. And in today's episode, Ken and I talk about Ken's approach to helping kids ages 12 to 18 drop out of school, exit the traditional system, and become self-directed unschoolers. We talk about how North Star is structured as a completely consent-based environment where students get to say no thank you to any activities that they don't want to participate in, and how that approach has led to an 80% rate of North Star graduates going on to university, including schools like Columbia and MIT. And we talk about some of the other outcomes that Ken has seen from students taking unconventional approaches to their education. We talk about how things like unschooling fit into the broader movement of alternative education and all of the things that Ken has seen change since entering the movement in the mid-90s to the huge spike that we've seen in the 2020s. And we talk about the ESA movement and how Ken thinks about state funding being opened up, affecting the work that he's doing, supporting both the unschoolers in his community and also across the country. I was really excited to have Ken on the show to bring a radical unschooling perspective to the conversations that we've been having here, and I really hope you enjoy listening. Ken, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
Well, thank you. It's really a fun joy to meet you. Glad to be here.
I'm really excited about this conversation and what we're going to explore over the next hour and change, because you started your career as a public school teacher and you left that career to help kids leave school, which you've been doing for almost 3 decades now, if my math is correct. And
Yes.
You have a lot of very strong opinions about unschooling and alternatives to the public school model and non-coercive learning, and the idea that kids don't need school to be successful, which, as you know, I am very sympathetic towards, but which is a very radical stance in the world at large. But even among the alternative education community, some of the stances that you take around what is and isn't necessary for a kid to learn are what would be considered by some to be extreme. And so I'm really excited to get into the weeds today about how you work with the students that you have coming through your programs and how your opinions and perspectives on what's actually important in the raising of a child and the ushering of them into adulthood, what's actually important. To kick this off, just to give people context who aren't familiar with your work, and as a sidebar for listeners, you have a phenomenal TED Talk about what you do that has, I think, 65,000 views I saw when I looked earlier this week. It's quite a few. You've written a book. You've created a bunch of blog posts. You have tons of content around the story of what you're doing. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that. People can go learn more about that elsewhere if they want to go into your story. But just briefly, to set the stage for the conversation that we're about to have, can you tell us what you're doing at North Star and kind of what the educational paradigm is that you're working with students within?
Sure. North Star's mission is to make living and learning without school possible for any interested teen in the Pioneer Valley of Western Massachusetts. So we exist to offer enough support so that any miserable child today in school could not go to school tomorrow legally and never again after that. So about 2/3, 3/4 of our kids are coming from school and wouldn't leave school without our support. And about 1/4 to 1/3, and a growing percentage post-pandemic, are people who've already dabbled in homeschooling, but are seeking more community and socializing and separation from their parents and so on as teenagers. And some of those people are homeschooling very well, and some of those people are homeschooling in despair as well. So, so we have a physical community center building in Sunderland, Massachusetts, near Amherst, Massachusetts, by UMass, where kids can come up to 4 days a week. And there's a calendar of once a week classes there. Every day there's 8 to 10 to 12 classes that are there. And kids can just be there and socialize. Kids can ask for tutorials. And everybody has an advisor they meet with once a week. And the idea is to make this whole approach coherent and viable and better than school for any kid who wants to try it. And we turn nobody away for money. We turn nobody away for being a hard case. And we've done that for 28 years. I've supported thousands of kids to consider quitting school, about 1,000 to actually leave school. And the alumni list is pretty good, pretty quality operation.
That's amazing. The obvious first question is, can you talk about outcomes? If you've been doing this for 3 decades, obviously you have seen what the track record looks like of kids who are coming out of your model. And I think that's the first pushback that most people have when they hear even about traditional homeschooling. It's like, well, the kids will grow up to be weird and they can't get into college and they'll never get a job, which I know is not true of the kids going through your program. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen?
Totally. And the very, very best outcome is that we have 7 to 8 or 9 second generation kids at North Star now. Kids who were 16 to 18 in the early years now have 13 to 14-year-olds who are enrolled in our program, or nieces and nephews. So we've outlasted to make it to second generation families. That is hilarious. The punchline is that, first of all, is that it's no big deal. Kids do everything. Our kids mostly go to college, and from college they do all the things that that regular people do. And if they don't go to college, they go to work. And if they don't go to work, they travel, or they start businesses. And it's more about the spirit they do it with and the attitude they do it with than the fact that they do it. Who cares? So there is not anywhere in this country or anywhere in this world some cul-de-sac of lost homeschoolers who ruined their lives and got stuck because they homeschooled and now they can't go to work or to college because they're asocialized weirdos. Like, that's such a myth. It's just ridiculous. So I don't really want to honor that or entertain that very long, and just say that actually, when you look at 80% of North Star kids, or more, go on to college and work or formal programs or things we're very familiar with, and a subset do original, unusual work, joining the circus and entrepreneurial stuff and just creative travel and other kinds of interesting things they might not have done. And some just go straight into the workforce, doing ordinary jobs, working for other people. And some subset are coming to us with mental health woes and still have them at 19 and are still struggling. So, not everybody ends up happily ever after. We are offering a different way to go through adolescence. It is a different way to live from 12 to 18 years old than suffer through junior high and high school. And if you choose to do that with us, there is 0 things that school kids can do that you cannot. There is not a single opportunity in life that only high school diploma holders can do that homeschooling people, whether or not they get a homeschooling diploma or a GED or high set or some other kind of, or other credential that they can get through going to community college and racking up enough credits or whatever they do. There's 0 things that people who homeschool can't do. It's just a total colossal myth. And it's really, a waste of everybody's time to worry about it. And then which is so even more hilarious, is that if you look at the North Star alums, they're ordinary folks. They go to college and some of them become teachers, and some of them are social workers, and some of them are, florists or working in hair salon, and they're just doing ordinary work, or they're as normal as the rest of the folks. They just didn't go to high school and liked their life better for those years. We have kids who've gone on to be superintendents of school, for that matter. It's hilarious. And, so the youngest superintendent in Massachusetts.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. I imagine they do a really good job as superintendent, as someone who has perspective of both what the system is like, but also what is possible outside the confines of the system.
Sure, they're no longer superintendent, but they were awesome, of course. And we've, for what it's worth, we've had 2 different superintendents and a couple of college presidents' kids enroll as members at North Star. So, even though their parents were in charge of their systems, they wanted North Star as the place for their kids to have a better adolescence. It's just not that big a deal. Any more big deal than, when you're 30 years old hanging out with people and you say, what kind of high school did you go to? And some of them say a private school or a Catholic school or a boarding school or a rigorous, or just a lousy public school that they barely made or, wasted their time at or liked. I went to a public school that I liked a lot, as a matter of fact. At some point, it just doesn't matter that much anymore what you did for high school. It feels so important when we're parenting. It feels so important when we're talking to teenagers. But actually, it's not that big a deal. And if you don't go at all, it's not a big a deal either.
Yeah, it's very strange. I was talking to somebody this week who made a comment about me being homeschooled. And I had this strange moment where I work in education and I spend a lot of time talking about education. So the fact that I grew up homeschooled comes up very frequently, but it doesn't really matter anymore besides the fact that I talk about education. So I use that in conversation because it's relevant. It's not like I don't walk around all day thinking I'm a homeschooler. Like, I'm an adult. I have a career. I'm doing things. The education background is kind of irrelevant. Nobody cares when you're applying for jobs after you have your first couple working experience. Nobody even cares where you went to college after you've had your first couple working experiences, unless you're in a career like you're a lawyer and they care which law school you went to. Most of the time, it doesn't matter. And so I do think we put a lot of undue pressure on both families and kids to have the perfect track record in high school, when really it's merely a stepping stone. And lots of other things can also serve as stepping stones to get to where you want to go. But I do want to talk a little bit about the outcomes that you mentioned, because I think while it is very intuitive to me as a homeschooler that kids went on to do all different sorts of things, I think it's counterintuitive to people who haven't been inside a model like this, because part of what you're describing inside of North Star is something that's very self-directed. And it's all consent-based. So you're not forcing kids to do anything. So if you're not forcing kids to make sure that they do all the things that they're supposed to do, how do you know that they're going to grow up and be able to function in the world? I think this is one of the biggest points of pushback that I get from parents about homeschooling who aren't familiar with the model. And I'd love to hear you talk about this.
Okay, and we'll talk about that in 1 second. First, I'll say once, and we're going to let it die, that schools don't specialize in making sure that kids can function. Schools just give kids bad grades if they don't do what schools think they need to do to function, and then they let them go off with their C's, D's, F's, whatever. They don't make sure that people can function. They just label them better. And so let's just make sure we're comparing, apples to apples here for a second. I don't try to make sure, because I assume that everybody wants to function to their best ability, to the best of their abilities, as an independent, interesting human being. And I trust people to want to figure out for themselves how to live their lives and how to spend their time. And the more they practice that as teenagers, the better they're going to be at spending their time as young adults or old adults. Sometimes people don't want to retire from a job because they're afraid they don't know how to spend their time, and they won't enjoy life anymore if they don't go to work. They're scared of the emptiness of retirement. I think that's kind of sad, and I wish they had more practice figuring out how to have hobbies and how to plan their time when it's unstructured. And so offering kids that freedom and opportunity, seems really healthy and important. And let's just play it out for just a moment, that the way most North Star teens that go to college do so is by starting with part-time community college at 15, 16, 17 years old. Most do not do some kind of high school homeschool program and then apply to a 4-year school. That's a different wing of homeschooling that I'm not affiliated with for the most part. It happens. It's just not my wing. My wing of homeschooling is helping kids get out of school, hanging out at North Star, doing classes and stuff with us, signing up for 1 or 2 classes at the community college, then doing a full-time semester, then doing a full year, and getting an associate's degree by the time you're 18 or 19 and transferring on to a 4-year school as a junior and saving 2 years and $50,000, $100,000 while you're at it. All after the joy of having all those years to yourself to explore your interests. So the question is, how does a kid who dabbles in goofy stuff at North Star and maybe doesn't do homeschooling curriculum show up at English 101 and Psychology 101 at the community college at 16 years old and pass? How did they learn to do that? No one helped them. They didn't do anything all those years from 12 to 15, and now suddenly they're taking a college class and passing? And the answer is, I don't know, but they do it. It happens every time. Very few kids fail out of the community college thing. And it's usually because of time management and other kinds of woes, not because of their academic abilities. It's because of their immaturity or their executive functioning issues. It's not academically oriented. Also, the community college people are oriented to offering lots of support and tutoring, and they have centers and support there. But it's shocking that these regular kids who decide, I think I'm ready, I'm going to go take English 101, go over there and get an A, or they take psychology or photography or Spanish or botany, and they go there and they get an A or a B plus or whatever they get, right? And it turns out that 16 years old and they're revved up for it, and this is their one major academic thing of the semester, and they do it, and they routinely. It's not that hard. So people need the confidence to take a risk. People need the confidence to declare an interest. And school isn't very good at supporting people to take risks or declare interest. There's no reason to declare interest in school except for after school clubs or something. But in classes, there's not a lot of space or time to do that. And schools are notoriously conservative places for kids that you don't want to take a risk to stick your neck out or do things that might get a bad grade or try extra hard, or why bother? Just do the safe thing and get your A and be done with it, And so what we're about is helping kids enjoy their lives to the point where they know what they like to do, they know what they want to be good at, and they know that there's certain things they want to get better at, and one way to do that might be to take a college class or to apply for a job or to have an internship and to try to take a risk, get out of their comfort zone and do the next thing when they're somewhere between 15 and 18 years old. And I just think that's natural. It doesn't take a lot of specializing from us to coach kids to do that. I mean, take some credit if you want, but just helping kids be engaged with their lives is the key.
So what does the support that you offer kids on the day-to-day look like? Can you talk a little bit about what your relationship with the kids is like at North Star? Because you've mentioned a couple of times that it's a consent-based environment.
Right.
So you're not forcing them to do anything. So maybe the best starting point for this question is what does the average day look like for a kid at North Star? What are the expectations, if any, that are on them? What are the agreements that they've made with you to come into the program? And then how are you supporting them if you're not telling them, okay, it's Tuesday, you have to sit down and work on your algebra?
With North Star, every teen has a community agreement to behave reasonably and not to bring, substances or weapons or, illegal things to North Star. And they also agree they can't behave in a way that makes somebody else not want to be there, and to agree to meet and solve problems if there's tension about it, and to help keep the place clean and tidy. There's no agreement about participation in other activities, except we do have a once-a-week community meeting that if you're there, you have to go to. And everybody does have an advisory relationship with an adult, and that is required. You can't not have an advisor, because we want to have a relationship with every kid, and it can be brief, but the teens have to give us the time of day. And we don't have custodians. We have a cleaning system in which all the teens are supposed to sign up for one day a week after hours at 4:00 to stay. So those are the requirements. Legally, every family has a homeschooling agreement with their superintendent until they turn 16. That's next to nothing. It's very easy to fulfill. It's very easy to get approved. It's like a driver's permit. No one's really paying attention. As long as you're making nice between the parents and the superintendent, there's no stress there. I've seen zero stress in 28 years with all the thousands of people. It's on occasion there's a divorce or separated parents get mad at each other, and there's stress in that relationship, but not between a public school system and a family. And then kids have agreements with their parents that we help them. We meet with parents beginning, middle, end of the year, 3 times a year, kids and parents together. And we hear kids promise they're going to read a book a week or work on the math with Khan Academy or the textbook or whatever thing they're going to do, and go to X number of North Star classes. And we watch and witness those agreements, and we keep track of them in our weekly advisories with kids, and we ask them how they're doing. And then we meet with parents again and evaluate how that's going. And so kids are accountable to their parents, and kids are accountable to us for being legitimate, users of our community. But they're not forced to learn things or pursue things they don't want to do by us. And we're favor of parents can hire a tutor at their house and make the kids do math at their house. They just can't pay us to seatbelt the kid in who doesn't want to do it. So parents have reasons, and often they're right, that they want a kid to work on a weakness and they want a tutor to do it. But if the kid won't do it at North Star, we let it go there. So the average day is you come in, Hannah, and you know, out of the list of 6 to 7 to 10 groups on the calendar, you might have 3 in your head that you want to attend. And you're going to sit in the common room and chit chat with people or read a book or have your computer, your phone or headphones, or you go for a walk, and you're probably hanging out talking to other kids. And then you go to your groups, and then you have your food and you eat at some point, and you play around more and you sit out back if it's nice in between your stuff. And if you really don't feel like talking to people, there's a silent room. We have a library. We also have a kitchen where you can cook and make food. There's a lot of different places to sit and a lot of different people to talk to, including adults. And so you would just use the community center as you would wish, for the time that you're there that day. And people use it differently.
I imagine you talk to a lot of kids who are dissatisfied. They're in public school and they're not happy with the model and the experience they're having. How do you discern what kids might be a good fit for something like this? Is it literally every child who's dissatisfied with public school would be a good fit for North Star? Or are there some archetypes of students who are unhappy in school? Because I think a lot of parents listening to this are, well, my kid's not super happy in school. Lots of kids aren't happy in school. Does that mean they all should drop out and do this? What's your take on this?
I think everybody should be invited to consider taking a year out of school. I wish there was, 7th grade, 8th grade out. I have an article with that title, 8th grade out, on my website and on Huffington Post. So everybody should have a gap year before high school or be offered it. Not everybody has to take it. I might not have taken it, but why not? Why not offer a middle school out to everybody who wants to try it and see how they live for a year? I just met a 12-year-old girl this morning who's miserable in school, and she's discovered that if she gets herself suspended, she doesn't have to go to school. And I told her, congratulations, she's discovered the secret of the universe, because there's actually no trouble. 7th grade, you get suspended every day, you're still not really in trouble, and nothing's going to follow you, and it doesn't matter. And she's like, yep. And I was like, well, you've won. And she laughed. It's hilarious. But then I said, and what we can really do is not have to go through that. We can just help you not go to school the rest of this year or next year or ever again if you don't want to. And she looked at her mother and said, we're joining this. I like this guy. We're joining. And who North Star, not everybody wants a teen center. So you might need our help to file the homeschooling papers and realize there's this alternative to do, and then you want to do it without us. That's fine. You were an independent person as a teen. You may or may not have wanted a North Star in your life, or you may have wanted us on a very limited basis. And that would be fine if you knew very independent homeschooling, unschooling people who just don't need North Star, but they did need the coaching to realize that the lifestyle is valid and available to them. And then beyond that, it's the kids. The most trouble are the kids who are coming for antisocial reasons. They're coming to find other kids to cause trouble with and see what they can get away with at North Star. And we don't really play that game, so it's a silly waste of everybody's time. But if you're coming to see how much you can bend our rules, at some point we're getting annoyed and we're going to win and tell you to go away and stop it already. You can't deal drugs. You can't be high or under the influence when the building's open. You can come and go, walk. You can walk to the corner store and get your food. We totally trust kids to mind their own business, to leave and come back, or arrive anytime and leave anytime. The whole thing is trust-based. And so if you're going to violate our trust, and then you can't be there, we can't have a functional relationship with you. But otherwise, the door's open and go mind your own business and do your best life. There are some kids for whom that's overwhelming and paralyzing, and so that's hard. There are some kids who just prefer being assigned assignments in school. There's kids who think they hate school, but then they come to North Star, and then it's kind of like the adult who wants to freelance and then says, can I just have my 40-hour-a-week job back, please? I just want someone to tell me what to do. This is way too much effort to have to figure out what to do and how much to do. And I don't know. I just want someone to give me some assignments more. And and we could accommodate that within a homeschooling North Star approach, but at some larger level, there's some kids who just prefer to go to school and just not deal with the self-responsibility of what we're offering. There's we have some kids on the autism spectrum, and there's some kids at the far end of it or even in the medium end of it, who have a hard time socializing with kids. And then when they have a hard time, they cannot talk about it with others. that's difficult for us to accommodate because we want people who are having a hard time to convey to others what the hard time is about and how we can work better with them. And so if you don't have the verbal skill to talk about things, North Star can be hard for us to have you. But no, there's almost nobody who, I tend to lump in 3 large categories. I did this in the study about alumni outcomes that we did with ASDE. The first group is they're managing school, but they're bored and they just wish they could do something better sooner. They don't wait for graduation. And that's more than half of our kids. Then there's about a third of the kids who are dealing with mental health woes. And there's anxiety, there's depression, there's eating disorders, there's self-harming and suicidal ideation. All kinds of issues going on and they're not going to school and they're being threatened with failure. And then there's another group that isn't mentally ill. They're just not going to school, like school refusal, resistors, I like to call them. And that's another 10, 15% of our kids who just like, it's stupid, I'm not going, why should I go? And what are they gonna do with me? I'm kind of curious. It's kind of an anthropology experiment. Let's see what happens, right? And then there's a subset of kids left over who are either on the spectrum or have physical health disorders. They want to do school, but it's just not plausible in their case to manage it. And so they end up with us, and it's delightful. And so with each teen, it's more about what's the life you want to lead. And we're doing these conversations with parents on the front end, and how many days a week at North Star, and what are you doing at home, and what else out in the world besides your house and North Star, and how do you see this playing out for the next few years? And let's think of an arc of a at least with the parents, maybe if the kids are too young to think of an arc of 5 years, of how this plays out over time, and so I welcome everybody. I think that it's like a human right to have self-control over yourself, and I think that it would be healthier if let me just reverse it. Like in the summertime, camp is optional. And there's a boatload of camps. But we don't start with the assumption that everybody must go to camp unless they opt out. It's that people have freedom over the summer unless they opt in to a camp of their choice that they like, right? Can we go there? That's the model. That's it. After school, your time is yours. You can choose to play a sport. You can have a piano lesson. You can be in theater. And you can have too many activities if you're a nitwit. But you can overschedule yourself. That's your problem. But we start with your time is yours and you get to choose, maybe in conjunction with your parents, how much to fill it, right? That is the sweet spot. That's the glory of respecting people and giving them choice and self-control. And that there's no reason that how we handle summers and weekends couldn't be extended to weekdays instead of compulsory school as well in a very healthy way.
I think a lot of people have knee-jerk reactions to statements like that, which I'm sure you hear this all the time, which is if we truly treated school that way, if we made it non-compulsory for every child across the country, we'd have huge subsets of the population that couldn't read and couldn't do basic arithmetic and didn't understand the basic civic structure of our country and didn't understand the historical implications of how we got here. And they wouldn't be able to not only function in society, but also take advantage of the world that we live in because they didn't understand it. What do you say to people who have this like deep-seated fear about the deregulation of compulsory education?
I will not scream, but it makes me want to scream to have to deal with that kind of attitude, because it gives so much benefit of the doubt to what I experienced as a school teacher and failed at as a school teacher, right? You think kids are learning civics in school? You think kids are learning to read in school? Most kids are learning to read, I know there's kids who learn to read in elementary school from teachers in school. I know that exists, but I think it's a minority of kids. I think most people learn to read outside of school. I think most people learn to count and do things with numbers outside of school. I don't think school is the place for most of that learning. It catches some kids and it extends it for other kids. And sometimes you discover books and writing and math in a way with a teacher that's better than you've done with your parents or the librarian, or you live in a chaotic house, or your parents aren't skilled in those things, don't do those things with you. All right, so sometimes the teachers are the people, but I'm not sure how frequent it is. So that's the first thing, is let's just not oversell that all this stuff that you wish is happening is actually happening. It's not. It happened for me, and then, well, I learned to read never mind. It's not, I got all A's in school. I took all AP classes, but I didn't learn reading and writing in school. I learned math in school, but I could have, it's preposterous to say I couldn't have learned it without school. That's ridiculous. I could have taken all kinds of other kinds of classes without high school. I would have done it voluntarily because I was nerdy like that. I wanted to do calculus. And so the first thing I'm saying when I say school is optional, I want schools to exist. I just want them to be non-coercive and non-compulsory. Kids need a place to go, to be with each other, to be out of their houses. Parents are working. Parents don't want to parent all day. We need the institution for the daycare effective. And that's not pejorative, that's respectful. We need schools as a place for kids to go during the day to be with each other and with safe places and people. Okay, and while they're there, they may as well have some organized activities to choose from. And it's reasonable to think that most kids would choose a bunch of the activities. They may not choose the current assigned activities. If you created a load of classes and had theater and photography and all these things, kids wouldn't pick standard 8th grade English as like, oh, that would be fun. Let me take the familiar 8th grade English class. Like, no one's going to sign up for that. And no one's going to sign up for like some earth science, boring, normal science class for 8th grade when they could do, explosions or volcanoes or who knows what else could be more creatively, offered and presented in a niche kind of way, like a community college would with weird titles and so on, right? And English, and all kinds of gender issues and just race and so much that could be offered that kids would go for. And if you get into technology and video making and sound editing and all this stuff that kids are doing and podcasting and whatnot, and YouTubing and TikToking and God only knows, kids will want to do things, and they may want some support, guidance, resources from adults, but stop judging everybody on everything. Stop grading them on everything, and stop requiring them to do it all. And just say, here's the cool person doing this thing, and here's the cool person doing that thing. You want to do any of them? And there's only time in a day to do a few of them. So how many do you want to do? And then they'll overflow their and then there's some kids who want to do none of it, and they just want to sit around and talk to each other. And if they can do that without bothering the rest of us, then let them. And sure, there's a possibility that those kids who only sit around and talk could not learn what you want them to learn. And these are kids who've never had friends before and just value the socializing. And I mean, could we just stop and pause for a moment and imagine, like, heroically, my comedic interests, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, and would you want to be their middle school teachers? And if they sat around all day being snarky on the steps outside, making fun of all the other kids going to class, right? But secretly, they're both like genius. They both know so much information. Colbert can recite all kinds of, literature and biblical, he knows everything. And so does Jon Stewart, right? They studied somewhere. They were interested in finding out stuff. And I doubt they learned much of it from their high school classes. And so you just a picture, or the South Park guys, or, and people who want to become doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals, or people who want to become artists and musicians. People want to get skills, and people, but the point is, just sitting around or wasting your time as a teenager isn't all bad. We just lighten up on worrying that every teenager who's wasting their time is doing something terrible, and every kid who goes to school and completes an assignment that they're then going to throw away did something that was so-called productive, because I think it's largely unproductive. I think we're overstating the value of that fake productivity that's just going in the trash can. So could we just lighten up a little bit? I guess we can't, according to your figurative question there, but that's my world.
Well, I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit for the sake of the conversation, because I think these are important things to unpack and shed light on, because I agree with you that, like, I tend to be very open to the perspective of children not being in formal school and being self-directed and doing their own thing. And my stance on any particular question around, well, is my kid doing enough this year, or are they getting enough exposure to this academic topic that they don't enjoy, is that they can catch up on it later if they miss something that ends up being important down the road. It's not that hard to learn the basic, the specific skills of any topic. It's much harder to regain the love of learning that is lost by being forced to do work that you don't see value in and you don't enjoy, and that you start to associate with both coercion and also the act of learning in general. You start to see those things as synonymous, and that's very difficult damage to undo. And so I tend to be, I think most kids would be better served being allowed to do their own thing. But I do think just because that is intuitive to me does not mean that it is a thing that is intuitive to the average person who's only ever been inside of school and hasn't seen this out in the world. And so I think it's important to parse some of this out, because I think a lot of people hear what you're talking about and they wonder, well, not all kids are super ambitious and self-directed. So if a kid is pulled out of school, what if they just don't do anything?
Right. What does not doing anything look like? Right. And I say to kids, I said to this young girl I met this morning, like, look, my goal is for you to have self-control. And if you don't read for fun and you don't count for fun and you don't like doing, English and math kinds of things, at some point you're 12. But at some point, 16, 17, 18, I would like you to feel confident in those skills enough that you don't feel like you have to avoid or can't do certain jobs or certain aspirations or college or other kinds of, programs that are certificate bearing because you didn't learn to read and count and write well enough. So at some point, we want to help you have this confidence and get over any insecurity you may have. That doesn't mean that you have to do English every day for the next 6 years like a school kid, but it does mean that I don't romanticize lack of skills. Lack of skills are bad, and people feel like they have to cover up and hide, their vulnerabilities, and that's not cool. And so we want people to be confident, but they could also be confident in a lesser amount of time and know some of those things while they also exploit their interests and just go for it with their art and music or their other kinds of, entrepreneurship for money. Just go live your life and feel good about yourself every day about making the best you can of what you have available to you. And so I just think we can be more supportive and less fear-mongering. There's so much fear that we instill in kids, and it's just preposterous. If you never read, Romeo and Juliet in high school, or you don't learn about the periodic table thoroughly in chemistry class in high school, like, you're doomed. Get out of here. Why are we telling kids they're doomed? It's just not helpful. It's just so much stress, and it's also falsely conceding people like me who did all that stuff. Then I thought I was pretty hot stuff. All my straight A's and all my AP classes. I was kind of falsely impressed with myself, shall I say. So, that's a separate harm is maybe trivial in this story, but mostly we're telling 80, 90% of kids that, we're either stressing them out or telling them they're no good because they don't want to learn or don't care about stuff that we declare they must.
A lot of what you're describing sounds like even the types of conversations that you're describing having, you're rationalizing with kids like they're adults. You're giving them the respect of an adult to another adult. You're giving them the respect to say, I think it will serve you well to not be afraid of these topics and to understand how to navigate them and to be able to do these things because X reason in the real world where this skill that you maybe aren't terribly interested right now will actually behoove you to have. But you're giving them the respect to say, I trust your agency to make this decision. And I'm willing to go through the process of talking you through why I think this is important. And I'm willing to put in the effort to sell you on this being important to you too, instead of just saying, well, because I said so, and the state board of education said so, so I guess you have to learn this now. Sorry.
Right. And I mean, so we end up having that conversation week in and week out as an advisor-team relationship. How are your skills coming along? Are you bothering? How do you feel about the fact that you were going to read a book a week, but you aren't, or you are, or it's all the same and same author or something, or do you want to branch out or not, or how are your parents? And then we meet with the parents 3 times a year. And if you do that year in, year out for 3, 4, or 5 years, and you have a pretty good sense of how kids perceive themselves. And we've also done a lot of informal self-evaluation where the kids are assessing themselves about, are they bothering to do the things that they said they were going to do, or that the world thinks they need, and do they believe that the world might be right, and should they do them or not. There's a lot of time over years to have these conversations, and it doesn't matter what I think in the end. It's not that I think the world's right and they're wrong, or that they're right and the world's wrong. It doesn't matter my opinion. It's, am I helping them explore it? And I feel it's important for kids not to be delusional. We don't need a bunch of homeschoolers who think they're good at things they're not. Or, we don't need a bunch of homeschoolers who are just like prima donnas, or just, falsely, conceit. It doesn't help the world to think you're better off than you are. Like, all right, so you've had this chance to manage your time, and your priorities, and you've really, worked in the bakery and created a business and so on. Good for you. I'm so glad we could help you do that. And that's the end of it, right? And then they can deal with English 101 if they want.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Galt Mortgage Company. I am not currently in the market for a house, but when I am, I will absolutely be working with the Galt Mortgage Company, which was founded by my friends Mitch and Tim earlier this year. Mitch and Tim have been working in the real estate world for years, and they learned that mortgages are way more expensive than they need to be. Most real estate agents don't even know how much extra profit is baked into the cost. So Mitch and Tim decided to build a new kind of mortgage, one where they voluntarily cap their own profit on every transaction and pass the savings along to you, the buyer, in the form of a lower interest rate. When I am on the market for a house, I will absolutely be working with Mitch and Tim. And if you are in the market, you should absolutely check out what they're doing and get a quote for interest rates that they can offer you. You can connect with them at johngaltmortgage.com, or you can find the link down in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. I find it really interesting. This is a little bit of a pivot, but I meant to mention this earlier as you were talking about the outcomes of students who go through North Star. I find it really interesting that 80% of them go on to college or some other equivalent career preparedness program. Right. I find it very interesting when people deviate from the status quo path in part of their probably usually secondary education experience, and then they step back onto it again when they've graduated from high school. What is motivating most of these kids to go back to college as opposed to taking a more non-traditional route? Or how are you guys talking to them about college as they're making a decision about what they want to do next?
I think that there's still a buy-in to the concept that, college is a path to the good life. And we'll get to that. Let me pause that for 1 second to back up and just say that even without North Star across the country, I think most homeschooling is mostly K through 8. And a lot of those kids go to high school still. It's okay to homeschool or unschool K through 8, but you better go to high school and get a real transcript so you can apply to a real college. I think that's a similar kind of fear. But yes, for the North Star kids, the college is so built into our culture that I can argue with kids or present to kids, you don't have to go to college, and there's praxis and there's jobs and there's other kinds of things you can do. And some of our kids do those things, right? And they just skip, and especially in the technology field, computer programming, other sorts of things, the world's really wide open. But in all kinds of careers you can have without going to college, or else going briefly for a certification. And the more college becomes expensive and prices itself out, and you're having lifelong debt for the experience of an undergraduate or 4-year thing, it's more dubious to make that the default. And so kids are getting that, but still the fear that it was okay to not go to high school, but I better, if I want to be a professional in this culture, I should go to college. And I'll confess that I still accept that. I'm more comfortable with people waiting to go to college till they know what they want to do, spending the years from 18 to 20 to 23, not necessarily going to college straight away and working first and dealing with community college and 4-year colleges later. Because it's too much money to go for the heck of it the way that I went. It's just so so life-altering with debt that you should really know why you're going before you go, in my opinion, and you should have some world experience to inform that. But then to say, it would be naive for me to say that you can do anything in the world without going to college. You can't become a doctor, you can't become a nurse, you can't do a lot of professions without getting some credentials. And even if there's a lot of times the credentials are less than you think, or it can be obtained in a 1 or 2 year certificate program instead of a 4-year college experience, that's good to know too. And there's some fields that don't require any of these kinds of formal credentials. But a 4-year college credential at some point is going to have value to a lot of kids. It's still more unquestioned than I wish it were further questioned than it is. And I do, North Star does introduce the question of, oh, you're going to college next. Oh, what do how did you make that decision? How is now the time, right? And then we support that 100%, but it's not automatic. And it's certainly not that North Star wants 90% of its kids to go to college. And when I say 80%, and that because there's some percentage that don't, that's whatever. I have no investment in the outcome. My only investment is to say, we've had kids go to Amherst College, where I went. We've had 2. We've had kids go to Brown. We've had kids go to Columbia. We've had kids go to MIT. Choosing North Star is not a cap on your options. You can do all of, and if you call up Harvard admissions office, there's kids at Harvard who are homeschooled. I mean, I want people to believe the facts, right? And the facts are that, homeschooling has nothing to do with the hill of beans of going to college. In fact, you go sooner, better, faster, more self-aware. And when you save so much money and you enter as a sophomore or junior, so you don't have the nostalgic 4-year experience, you get something else in exchange. That's what I want people to understand as an option. But still, to answer your question, I just think it's the default in this culture still for kids and parents. And I don't confront that head on. If I took that on too strongly, no one would come to North Star. If I said to some 12-year-old, first of all, I'm going to tell you, you don't have to go to junior high ever again, for sure. And you probably don't have to go to high school, assuming you like us. And beyond that, let me tell you that I'm going to talk your butt out of going to college too by the time I'm done with you. Then they wouldn't join. That would be too scary. I'd be nuts, right? It's one thing to say, I can help you never go to middle school for sure for the next 2 years. And I can, assuming you like us, you definitely don't have to go to high school either. But if I kept going, that would be counterproductive. They wouldn't join. That'd be terrible.
I think there are a couple really important things that you just said. One is the fact that people who've come out of North Star have gone on to schools like Columbia and MIT, where normally people think you have to go to the best prep school to be able to get into a school like that. And also your acknowledgement that there are homeschoolers at Harvard. There are lots of homeschoolers at Harvard. There are lots of homeschoolers at MIT. There are lots of homeschoolers at Yale. There are lots of homeschoolers at all of these schools that are very prestigious and are considered very difficult to get into. And I think there was a point in time where it was an act of faith to homeschool and hope that your hypothesis was correct, that could lead to an outcome that typically you would have to go to traditional school to attain. It's not an act of faith anymore. No. It's a thing it's very clearly, the evidence is very clearly there that the path exists, and it's not, some exorbitant deficit to overcome being homeschooled to get into an institution like this. The other thing that I think is really interesting is it's very common, I think, for people to become comfortable with the idea of leaving the education system for either, like you mentioned, the elementary and maybe middle school years, or for the high school years, but to not let go of the idea of like all of the other pieces of the system, the necessity of them. And I find that really interesting how it's not as absolute as one might think. It's like, well, I'm rejecting the education system altogether, and I know the system isn't important for me anymore, and I'm going to go do my own thing. It's rejecting it piecemeal, like different pieces of it that don't fit. And I'm curious because Because to me, it's a bit counterintuitive. It's like, well, if one piece of it's broken, like probably all of it is, right? Like if one piece isn't delivering the outcomes that you want, probably the other pieces aren't also, which you alluded to, and maybe we can get into in a little bit. You are inside of the system seeing the outcomes, and that's part of what it sounds fueled your beliefs around what would work at North Star. But I'm really curious about how you've seen the evolution of this movement over the past 3 decades that you've been doing this, because the world is very different than it was in the mid 90s in many ways, but especially educationally. Homeschooling in the mid 90s was a very fringe thing to be doing. And especially post COVID, there are millions of homeschoolers in the United States. It's a movement that has legs, and like everybody knows a homeschooler who turned out relatively okay. And it's not this crazy thing that we heard somebody in like 3 valleys over is maybe homeschooling their kid and we're like not sure they're going to turn out okay. They might be a conspiracy theorist, like we don't know. Like it's much more normal now. And there's so much else that's happening in the education movement with micro schools and other types of private schools, and online education is a thing now. What have you seen in the shift both culturally around how we think about how open we are to alternatives, but also like what are some of the biggest shifts that you've noticed and maybe are excited about?
Well, I think you've pretty much summarized it, that it's just so common. In the 90s, I was in a grad program that I didn't finish when I was still going to become an administrator. And I couldn't find, I found 7 kids to interview about their homeschooling lives and where I live. And, they didn't need me or want me, but they were willing to talk to me about, and they didn't need North Star, I'm saying, but they were willing to talk to me about their experiences. But it was hard to find 7 kids to talk to, who were teenagers back then. And so, right, there's just so many more people doing it. The fear is so much less. It used to be that when people would call North Star and I would say, well, let me tell you, just so you understand, we're not a school. Don't hang up. I'm going to coach you to file homeschooling papers, and homeschooling isn't what you think it means. So hang on, I'm going to explain it. Don't hang up. And now I don't have to do that anymore. I would say, well, we use homeschooling as a mechanism to get you the freedom and the space, and for us to have the relationship that we want to have with you and your child. So we'll help you file the plan. It's all very mundane. It's all very formulaic. It's simple. And then we can start with what your priorities are and your child's priorities, and it's really great fun. I don't have to worry that they're going to hang up in the middle thing. Like, there's still people who think North Star doesn't give diplomas. My kid's going to get an accredited high school diploma, and they do hang up, or they won't call us. That's still a thing. But it's not nearly as, people are much more calm and comfortable with the concept that there's our own longevity. Like, whatever we're doing, it must have worked because we're 28 years and we're still here. So there's a certain amount of credibility we have just by being old. And then collectively, when we started, there was Sudbury Valley School, and I never spoke to those people, and they didn't really welcome visitors, and I still haven't been there. But there's a lot of, that movement's growing a little bit. There's more Sudbury schools than there used to be. And we went to visit the Albany Free School and Mary Loya and people like that back in the day in the 90s. There were some homeschooling co-ops, but the world wasn't very big of this sort of thinking, whether homeschooling or whether specifically unschooling. And there was Growing Without Schooling with John Holt associate. Susanna Shepfer ended up being on our staff and is a good friend of mine now, for people who know Susanna. Now everybody's engaged. And I think there's a lot more people engaged in micro schools, alternatives to schools, than there are comfortable with unschooling and self-directed learning and consent-based, options for kids, or non-coercive learning. I think I'm still in a very skinny lane of this wider highway, but boy, it's a raucous highway now. There's a lot of people out here creating all kinds of alternatives for kids outside of school. And if we broaden it to, charter schools and school choice, the whole school choice movement is a hyper growing thoroughfare now. And I have this wacky narrow lane on it, that is my own, or not my only, but the self-directed lane on it is the little skinny section of it. But it is a much busier place, and it's normalized tremendous amount in the years.
Are there other models that have started to emerge that you're also excited about?
Well, let me just say that for people who don't know, we share our approach and our consulting through a network called Liberated Learners, because there's only one North Star and I'm not creating more of them. So we're not franchising. So our network for consulting and sharing is Liberated Learners. There's about 15 current programs. As many as 25 or 40 have started, but they're all not existing anymore because it's really hard to sustain them. Over the years, I've been to a lot of Aero conferences and I support the folks there. And there's a lot of democratic free schools. There's a lot of agile learning centers. There's a lot of Sudbury schools. I am for places where kids can say no thank you to adults. Oh, you guys are doing a cedar play. I don't think I want to do that. Thank you. You're going on a hike. I'd rather not. I'm happy reading my book or playing with my Legos or whatever they're doing. I would like to see more non-coercive environments. And I think that's a tiny minority of this micro school expansion that's happening. I think I might be a little cynical, but a lot of the micro schools are places where very good adults with very clever ideas are doing school better than school in a kind-hearted way and getting kids to have better outcomes and better test score results and so on, by doing all that stuff better by the kids they're doing it with and the way the kids were experiencing at school. That's jolly well great. It doesn't float my boat. Like it's not my world. I don't care that it's good I'm glad kids have those options. I'm glad those people are all having more meaningful lives. It's great. But I am not for overall places that kids must go 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, and where when they're there, they have to do the clever assignments the adults have cooked up for them. That's a little obnoxious because it's better than that. There's a lot of summer camps and after school programs that are really awesome, that are adult organized and led, and kids can't wait to go to them. And I'm for those. So I can be for the micro schools that kind of are more like summer campy or in the after school stuff, or, kids are doing reading, writing, counting in ways that seems important and they get why they're doing it and they value it. I'm for all that too. I'm not quite as lousy as I was just, I think I overstated it there a second ago, but I am not enthused in my heart about alternative private schools where kids have to go whether they like it or not. And, their parents get a choice and the parents can sign them up. But I see a lot of kids going to private schools and charter schools in Massachusetts who don't like them and need to not go to school. And I see a lot of homeschooling kids who have a lot of fuss and bother with their parents still over trying to do conventional workbooks and assignments. And there's a lot of stress and bother there. And I just wish we could all give kids a little more space and trust. And so that back to your question, which I'm lost there, but I think what excites me the most are people who trust kids the most and take no thank you for an answer from kids. And that's a precious few.
It is a precious few. What are the things that make you feel so strongly about kids being able to say no thank you? Is it the development of agency where you want them to know how to hold their own and be the primary creative force in their world because that's the most important necessary skill for them to have going into adulthood? Is it because you don't want to see them lose their love of learning? Is it something else? What makes this like the core locus of how you think about educating children?
I think it just feels like a basic human right. I think that telling kids you must read this book because I think it's good for you, and then you must write a report in this format, and if you don't, I'm going to give you a bad grade and it's going to affect your life, so you better do it. I know just what we need to do today that's going to, and if you stick with me, I will give you a good life. Well, that doesn't create any agency. That just creates dependency then. You better hope you get good teachers all your life and you get the right people giving you stuff. How are you going to figure out for yourself what to do, right? And so I think, and clearly as Well, as a kid, I hated getting dumb assignments that I would do and do well in school with, but I didn't like having my time wasted. I didn't like bad teachers, but I did it. As a teacher, I think I just blew a fuse trying to yell at kids to do what I needed them to do in my 8th grade US history class for 6 years. I think I just burned myself out, and realizing that threatening them and cajoling them and bribing them and threatening them, it's inhuman. It brought out the worst in me. I didn't like how I felt when I was doing any of those things. It's not the kind of adult I wanted to be. It's not the relationship with humans I want. And sure, they're younger than me, and I could be a coach, a guide, a person who knows things they don't know that might be good for them to know. But the whole thing is not working anyway. They're not learning the stuff I'm trying to make them learn. And it's dehumanizing me. It's an insult to my dignity. And it's certainly an insult to their dignity. And why don't we just not do it? And I'm pretty sure that's the heart of it for me, is it just feels insulting to try to make kids do what you think they need to do instead of asking them what they would like to do. And if they might say, I don't know, I'd love for you to tell me what to do today. And then that's okay. Get some consent, oh, well, how about going on a hike? Or how about reading this play together? Or would you like to know more about, if you're older, whatever. You can then invite kids that you have an idea that you think would be really good to do, and then they can say yes or no to it. And if they say yes, great. I don't see why that's so hard.
There's a lot of trust based into what you just described of children's ability to know what's good for them and to know what they want to be working towards. How much do you incorporate in an element of sales where you're committed to getting consent, but you're also determined to get the consent on certain topics because you're pretty sure that something specific is going to be useful for a kid to know how to do?
Pretty much zero sales. Pretty much I say, I'm going to go do a really important class right now. There's a really good visitor coming to give a really good talk that you might really enjoy and it might change your life. And we're going upstairs now and you could come. And you're not coming. And then I leave. And I proceed with the people I have. And that's that. And I would expect people to do the same for me because I get invited to the opera or the symphony and I'm going to go and not really appreciate it. And it's a lot of money and I'm going to kind of fall asleep. I don't really have the context to really value the expertise that's happening in front of me. And I'm kind of the wrong guy. And then I want to go see, the NBA basketball game, and I should take the right people to go appreciate the magic that's happening there and not the people who won't appreciate it. And the people who don't want to go shouldn't be made to go and shouldn't be scolded that they have the wrong values or the wrong cultural interests. And, trying to make the people read books they don't want to read or watch movies they don't want to watch or TV shows, series they don't want to watch. It gets to be wearisome. It gets to be annoying. And we don't do that with our friends and people we respect. We don't have, and if you really have a secret agenda, you're always trying to get well, that wouldn't work for me and my wife. You can't have a secret agenda you're always trying to get them to do by asking them and hoping they say yes and then pushing them when they say no. You have to come out and say, this is what I'm calling in my chips. This one I need you to do, whether you want to or not. I just need you to say yes. I want you to come to this one with me, please. Right? And then you be direct about it. And then that's a different question. And then I can say, okay, I don't really want to go, but I'll do it this time, right? That's reasonable. And you can say that to a kid. I can say that to a kid at North Star. I'm going to push you this time. Come on. And then they'll say, still no, and then I'll give up. But, I can push harder sometimes. And I would acknowledge that I'm pushing harder than usual. That's respectful. But the answer is just no, 0 to your sales. Stop it.
The case that you're making, and you have 20 years or 30 years, of track record to prove this, is that kids can be left to their own devices. They can be allowed to say no to anything that's put in front of them. There is no sales process required. These are kids that were actively trying to figure out how to get out of school because they hated it. And 80% of them will still go to college and be successful there.
Mostly. Let me just push back a little bit. I'm saying the institution, my role as director at North Star or staff at North Star. So there may be a place where a parent says, I need you to read a book. You don't read. You're illiterate. And I know those North Star people will offer and help you, but you don't say you want their help and you're never going to read it. I insist. I'm taking your phone away. We're having the tutor come to the house. You have to learn to read, right? I think there's a role for parents to be coercive at some point. It's like the librarian, though. I see the North Star staff role more like a librarian is going to make you take out books or read the right kind of books when you're at the library, right? Or the gym, the person at the front desk of the gym who's not your personal trainer, that you haven't not invited to be your personal trainer. They're not going to come over there while you're drinking some sport drink and say, that has too much sugar in it. You shouldn't be drinking that. And I haven't seen you exercise enough yet today in this gym. You're just standing here showing and glowing. What are you doing here? Gym people don't do that to, staff unless you hire them to do that to you, and then they can, right? And so kids can be accountable, but I prefer the role where they're accountable by choice to me, but not like, and so there are definitely moments where parents know their kids, they know them better than I do. They know what they've been avoiding. They know what is really a threatening, glaring vulnerability for them that really, needs to be addressed. And I respect that. And often the kids will agree. Sometimes they won't. But again, there's not a foolproof alternative. We're arguing against a mythical nonsense that that school won't let kids get away with this. Like, it's just silly. Schools, the kids go every day for 180 days for 12 years, and they don't really like to read. And they fake it through English class. And let's stop pretending that the alternative is just coercive schooling. Coercive schooling isn't solving the problem you want. It's not that it's not real. It's not that, look, there's a lot of, you watch the stuff on TV and they interview people on the street about common civic information, and people don't know anything. It's embarrassing to be American, right? It's just cringeworthy how ignorant the general American public is on so many topics, right? All right. So most of those people went to public school, but it's plausible we could have even more ignorance if everybody only did whatever they wanted. It's possible, sure. I'm not sure how much worse it would be. I don't think school is saving us from this dystopia that we're already at the dystopia. Kids don't like school. They don't really learn the stuff that presented within school. They get tired of learning, and then they choose ignorance and stuff that doesn't annoy them. And then we have ignorant adults in America who went to public school or private school. I'm schooling. It's not public or private. There's a lot of kids go to private school and you have to do a little more because they can kick you out there. So, at a Catholic school or a charter school, charter schools aren't private, but at a school where you're there by choice, and if you don't do the work, they can kick you out. Your floor is a little higher. You have to do a little more stuff, out of fear of getting kicked out. But you can still kind of pass and not really take it all seriously. And so the assumption that school is the source of all information for everybody who's ever learned anything, and that if you don't go to school, therefore you won't learn it, it's just so idiotic. It just slays me.
Yeah, I think some of it also comes down to, I agree with everything that you just said. And I think some of it also comes down to, like, it's less a problem of systems and more a problem of culture, of how we think about education. It's less that you need kids to be forced inside of a coercive system in order for them to learn something. We have both, years and decades of examples to the contrary, such as what you're doing, but also a long history of, prior to the inception of the education system as we know it, a world where people were well educated without there being a national coercive model that, you were in trouble with the law if you weren't sending your child to government school. And I think I spend a lot of time thinking about the cultural implications of this, because I think it's one of the core problems to all of this, is that we have a culture that doesn't really, it does a lot of lip service for learning and the importance of it, but it doesn't really value it at any great length or to any extent. And so we live in a culture where you can not know what countries border America, or whatever questions they're asking people on the street, where they're like, I don't remember. And you have to, like, what continent is, like, they'll ask you questions like, what continent is Canada in? And they'll be like, Europe. And you watch these videos and you go like, my gosh, how is this possible? But it's not just that the system sucks. It's that we also have a culture where it's cool to be apathetic about school. It's cool to be too good for it and not care about it. And so I think this ties back to the point that you made about like the role of the parents inside of the model that you're building too, where like they're also a core ingredient to the incentive structure being built for the kids. I imagine you talk to a lot of parents who want to unschool their kids, who maybe aren't in a location where a model like North Star exists. What advice do you generally give parents who want to unschool?
Well, I think, obviously it's trusting yourself and trusting your kids and realizing you can't really do real harm, and that you're trying to figure out a way to help your child live their best life. And, there's some online options that could be the skeleton. There could be some local volunteer work or homeschooling co-ops and classes that maybe could be a skeleton. Depends how old they are. And if if there's a parent, if you need supervision of the kids, if they're 7 years old at home, you can't leave them home alone. It's hard. And so in that case, it's like find the least bad school and see what you can. It's again, it comes back to, and to answer the previous question as well, my vision isn't just leaving everybody on their own to their own devices until they get bored. It is keeping schools open as they are, but making them non-coercive, and having the art room and the library open, and having book groups, and having math and science labs open with classes in them that are voluntary that kids can sign up for about the way, and kids who are, and computer labs open where there's programming, and, we want the school structure available and content available. If everybody has to make everything up from scratch, everybody doesn't have enough initiative. It is overwhelming. It is paralyzing, right? And so that's not my vision. And I push back against that too. And so, and so people do need support. Is everybody for themselves thing is a little too much, right? There has to be some community support, where a community center, summer camp for every, day camps that people could in the summer. Like there has to be some kind of support for families and support for kids so that everybody doesn't have to invent everything from scratch. And so if you're alone and you really want to unschool and you're in a rural place and there's not much support, I don't really, the best you can do is know you're not harming your kid. And if you feel school is more harmful than helpful, you pull your kid from school, you file the homeschooling plan, and then you trust create the best set of options you can. And otherwise, school at its worst is killing kids. But if your kid is going knowing they have a choice and that you have their back, they probably aren't getting killed by going to school. It's just a waste of time and effort. And you don't take it so seriously, and you go enough to have a community there and take it, halfway. There's a romantic version of just don't go to school, use the public library, use online classes, be on Zoom all the time with kids from all over the world and learn all 7 different languages. And, Kath Phrase has her amazing little interactive worlds you can join in and pop in and out of, and it's really kind of cool. I mean, there's some fringe possibility that your child has the personality that whole thing suits them. So good if it does. But otherwise, we have to live with the best we can create, and I think it's going to be okay. And I think that we can all give ourselves a little credit for being resilient. That a lot of us had school years that were wasted or weren't very good, and if at some point you find your kids stuck in a school they don't like, and you can't come up with a good option for them, but you can, make it at least survivable, at least manageable. Having a crummy year is. It irks me to see the loss and the waste of time. I'm sorry. I don't want anybody to have that, but it's also survivable. And so, if you're a parent and you're struggling, then do what you need to do for yourself, and be a role model for your kid in problem solving.
I'm going to pivot the conversation a little bit because I also want to talk about the ESA movement, because I think you've been in the business for a long time of making your program available to people in spite of any financial difficulties that they might have in paying for your model. You've made it a point to be accessible no matter what. And yet you're also, I'm sure, very aware that lots of people are staying inside of the status quo model because they can't afford anything else. What's your take on the pros and cons of the ESA movement? Do you have reservations about it?
So I learned all about ESAs this year, and if you go to kennethdanford.com and look at the blog and go back to January, you can find my evolution here, because I knew nothing back in January when I decided I need to learn more about public financing of homeschooling and school choice, because I'm watching too many friends close their centers because they just can't get enough people to pay enough tuition and do enough fundraising to sustain them, and they burn out, and it's really frustrating. And there is some philanthropy, but there's not enough philanthropy for everybody to be sustained forever. So there has to be public funding. And so I really wanted to either find out, are there public schools that are opening things up in the way I was suggesting before, in a non-coercive kind of programming way, which I largely think there are not. But I'd love to hear if there are, if your listeners know about public schools offering non-coercive programs. I'd love to hear more about that. And so the alternative is giving public money to homeschoolers. And it turns out there's a whole movement I was kind of clueless about with the education savings account. And it turns out it's a lot of money. $4,000 to $8,000 a year, depending on the state, going to the parents that they can either turn in as a voucher to one private school or spend ad hoc to appropriate vendors, which may or may not include a place like North Star, where we do have classes and tutorials and advisories, but it's all optional. So, I think we'd largely qualify, but maybe we wouldn't. I don't know. Clearly, for the longevity of this movement, ESAs are heroic. It's the revolution. If every family came to North Star with $4,000 to $8,000, we could dispense with our fundraising. We still have some tuition on top of that, but it would make all the difference. It would make all the difference to local families. It would make all the difference to our center. It would make all the difference to my consulting people to open centers for other families and other communities. ESAs would clearly be the revolution if every family came with $5,000 or more. It needs to be a little higher, but in the end, it's a pretty darn good head start, right, to making a possible sustainable program. And so I'm overwhelmed with enthusiasm from that side of things. And then my internal liberal political self is like, but wait, we're going to give $5,000 to $8,000 to the richest families who are already going to private school too? We're going to give $5,000 to $8,000 to a bunch of religious schools that teach that people like me are kind of bad because I'm Jewish. Do we have to? But we kind of do. Some states do put means tests on them. You can't, but the religion thing is out of bounds, and that a lot of this money is going to go to people who are going to spend $5,000 to $8,000 on the kinds of conventional homeschooling or private schools that don't float my boat the way I was talking before. They're not really non-coercive. And so just shifting a lot of money from the public market and the public schooling to private schools that are pretty directive doesn't really do much for my heart. It gives parents a choice, but it doesn't really help kids, from my point of view, the way that I want to see the revolution. It's not my revolution. And then what's left on the back end is the public schools, bless them, where I went and where my kids went and where my son is a teacher now and where a bunch of people are still going to be going. Can we just make sure there's enough money to keep the wood shop open and the gym heated and, enough teachers to have enough classes, and they're obligated to run the school buses. They're obligated to have one-on-one aides for kids with special needs. They have a bunch of obligatory expenses that can't be cut down when a couple kids leave and get ESA money. Like, it's the proportion has to work, right? And so I just want, usually I say I want the public schools to be sufficiently covered on the backside of this so that they're not imploding and they can still offer all the things they do. And then I stop and pause and then say, why am I still so loyal to these stupid public schools that are on my nerves, that made me quit my job 30 years ago because they're unreformable and I've given up on reforming them? Why am I still so protective and defensive for them? But I am. And so, because part of me just wants there to be the non-coercive, non-judgmental, non-graded, high-level facility in every community. That's the place where kids go and meet their neighbors and have options to all kinds of cool classes of all kinds of things year round, and can't that just be free and available to everybody? And moving and instead the choice is to get a bunch of rigorous, graded, judged, stressful private schools that parents can now choose among and spend for free, get to go to places they couldn't have gone before. And maybe up to a point, because even $8,000 isn't enough to run a full-fledged private school either, but it's getting headway there. A lot of private schools cost a lot more than that. But at least there's some traction there. But that's not my utopia, right? Of all these kids going to places where they're still getting A, B, C, D, F, where they still have to go 5 days a week. They can't have Thursdays to do the horses. They can't, have a day a week to run their own little business, or, bake bread, or stay home, or just 3 days a week out is enough for them. There's no trust for kids to mind their, to create their own lives. So the whole ESA movement isn't really aligned with all of my values, but the ESAs are the source of stability for North Star, Liberated Learners, and all these other tiny alternative programs that do have my heart. And so I can't think of a better option for that right now, unless all the public schools want to create programs which they have no interest. They're not going to create them. So I don't know what I'm holding out for. I'm stuck. Those are some of my reservations. How do those match yours?
Well, I think that I talk to a lot of people who have a lot of concerns about the ESAs leading to more government oversight and bureaucratic oversight of the different alternative models that are emerging. So they're concerned that it's going to lead to less freedom down the road to have very unorthodox programs, because there's going to be more regulation around what types of programs can accept the ESAs. And so models are going to have to conform to the requirements of the ESA voucher, eligibility in order to stay competitive on the market, or even more directly, like it's just going to lead to more regulation across the board around what's okay to do in a private school.
Yeah.
And I understand that. I don't know if you have thoughts about that. I don't see that as being like, they can do that anyway. They can come out tomorrow and change the regulations about public. So, I mean, obviously there's due process and it doesn't exactly work like that, but they could try tomorrow to start the process of regulating private schools. They don't need ESAs to be able to do it.
Right. And I share the fear, and I already alluded to the fact that I'm not sure North Star would qualify in every state as an ESA, because we're not coercive enough, to give public money to, maybe, by some people's standards. And I wouldn't want to become more coercive just to get that money. So that is a problem. I see that. Let me pivot though and say a different. I'm getting in trouble here, but I'm on your show once, and people can hate me or not. But a lot of my learning this year has been helpful to understand that school choice came about in the 80s and 90s as a liberal movement from progressives and people of color who felt that schools weren't serving them. And as they won control of public schools, there's an article by James Foreman Jr. in particular about this. The school choice movement shifted, and now it's a more conservative movement. And the ESAs are coming out of red states. And I don't know how to handle the fact that I don't like anything else that these red state legislators are doing about abortion, about gun rights, about LGBTQ issues, about race relations. I don't happen to like Ron DeSantis very much, but he's the king of school choice, right? Arizona, I don't really trust for myself. I'm speaking only for myself, the Republican Party of Arizona's values. And so how far am I going in aligning myself with, I have trust issues, and I don't necessarily know the end game for everybody else here. And I really want more freedom for more families, for more kids in particular. And I see this as a very powerful tool, and I see a lot of potential in it. But the people pushing it the hardest are pushing a lot of other things that I categorically disagree with them on. And I find they're very uncomfortable. And I've had a lot of tension about that. Is that okay to say on your podcast?
Now that you said it, yes, it is. This is a free speech zone. You're allowed to say whatever you want.
I'm open to, people helping me out with that, or telling me I don't have to be so fearful. But
Well, I have a slightly different take, which is not agreement or disagreement with what you just said, but a tangential and related point, which is that I find it extremely distasteful that this is even a conversation that warrants being had. Um, I find it very distasteful that questions about education have to get tied up with all the other political issues because it shouldn't. It is. It's you're stating facts that, school choice is championed by political parties that are also or opposed by political parties that, you're buying a package deal when you vote for someone. You're buying their school choice policy and all the other things that they stand for too. And we see this in elections of late where people are taking strategic school choice positions because they know it's swinging elections. It's very interesting to watch. But when you take the position of a mere observer, but it shouldn't. The way that we educate our kids and the way that we fund the education of our kids and the options that are available to us should not come down to whether or not we can stomach all of the other things that someone championing the education values that we agree with happens to also stand for. I find it very bothersome that the conversation comes back here. I know that there's, this is just the reality of how things are, but I dislike how political of an issue education is because it shouldn't be. We're talking about our children. They should, by definition, be exempt from a lot of the other political stuff. They're children. They're not, they're not voting yet. They don't have stances on political issues, or maybe they do, but they're allowed to. They're figuring things out. But the way that we educate them, it's a thing that I find often crosses the aisle politically. Like people on both sides of the aisle tend to have similar stances on a lot of issues pertaining to the actual mechanics of educating a child and what is good and what is not and what they want for their kids. And it bothers me when it gets very muddied by politics. I just wish it wasn't that way.
Sure. I just wrote in my last piece, I wish there were a lot more public Democratic leading figures speaking out in favor of school choice. And apparently Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, is one such character. I would welcome having more of that happening. That would make things more comfortable for me. So anyway, there's some that part of the school choice movement leaves me concerned, wary. I don't know what the right word is. Like, what am I signing up for? I don't always know. All right, and one last thing. I clearly, for families to have an option to their current public schools and ESA, there has to be some money involved. Someone has to give a voucher worth some substantial amount of money to the parents. But I'm not sure that it's when the government spends lots of other money in ways I don't approve of and I don't get my money back. And so I'm not sure that because you don't use public school, you're entitled to your school share of the money. I just don't think that's how taxes work. I can't not use my library and get a Barnes & Noble gift card every year. Say, the money, my $25 worth of taxes that goes to the library, I won't go to the library. So can I have my gift card, please? I can't object to public spending programs I don't like and get a voucher back. And so I don't think that's the way. If they give a certain amount of money to every family and you can turn it into your public school and it gets doubled and tripled by local people, I want more of a vocabulary where they're giving the money to, and I agree that if we're going to give it to some people, you probably have to give it to everybody, and I can't have my way about my other concerns. I have to let it go. And other people have different values, and not everybody wants unschooling and non-coercive education. And so, the money's going to have to go to people with different values in mind. I understand all that. But I'm just, I'm not sure how much and what the mechanisms are. So anyway, ESAs are very exciting, such as I'm seeing them, and I'm very eager to see them in practice in the coming 2 to 3 years to see how they work. And I'm hoping to see, and I mentioned this to you before, that they are sufficiently useful so that a lot of this micro school growth is sustainable in the states where there's ESAs. It's a big test, right? I'm out without ESAs, the micro school growth in a lot of other states, will it be sustainable for 3 to 5 years? I don't know. Maybe not. It's really hard to sustain these programs for the long term just based on tuition alone or tuition and fundraising. Some people are really good at it, but most people find it really hard. And so I'm wondering what the percentage of success rate will be in the 3 to 5 year range. And then I want to compare that overall to in ESA states where ESAs are available to these programs. Is that the key difference? And I hope that the answer will be yes. And I hope that it will be inspirational for all of us that, when you give everybody X dollars and they can turn it into the program of their choice, it means a lot of small programs will be flourishing in ways that they can't flourish in other places, except by the, really hard work of a few people who burn out, right? So I'm hoping that that's what will happen.
It's definitely going to be a lot of variables are going to be added to the equation of how schools are being built over the next few years, especially in states where ESAs are passing. Is going to be very interesting to see how it changes the game. I'm very curious to see what starts to unfold.
So let me just say with that last sentence then. So if you're in an ESA state and you want some help to create a non-coercive center based on the North Star model and Liberated Learners Network, I'm at your service. And to see, I'm at everybody's service with this consulting, but I want to specifically be at the service of people in states with ESA money to see if we're going to have any better luck for the long haul, starting centers in places where families arrive with public money. So call me up, email me.
Where can people find you to do that? Where would you send people after this interview? To reach you or to read more of your stuff?
Well, a couple places. NorthStarTeens.org. That's North Star Self-Directed Learning for Teens in Massachusetts. I have my own personal website, KennethDanford.com. And LiberatedLearners.net is the network of our centers and our consulting. So info@LiberatedLearners.net, Ken@NorthStarTeens.org. Those would be the best places to go. But NorthStarTeens.org would get you started pretty well.
Amazing. Thanks, Ken. This was great.
All right. Thank you. I hope people enjoyed it.
All right, that's a wrap for this week. Thank you so much for being here. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, please leave a 5-star rating. Ratings are how this show gets discovered by other people, and it helps me bring in better guests. And no matter where you're listening, please like and subscribe to the show to make sure you don't miss a future episode. That's all for this week. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next week.